Have you ever been absolutely certain you knew what someone was thinking, only to discover you were completely wrong? What if I told you that your greatest strength in reading people could actually be your most dangerous weakness? Today, we're diving into something that could change how you interact with everyone around you forever. I'm talking about the razor's edge between insight and assumption, between understanding and projection. This isn't just about being wrong occasionally. This is about how the very gift that makes you perceptive can systematically sabotage your relationships, your career, and your peace of mind. Stick around, because what I'm about to share will challenge everything you think you know about reading people. Before we go any further, if you want less noise and more clarity in your life, hit that subscribe button. I drop a new mental filter every single week that will help you see through the chaos of modern communication. Now, let me tell you why this topic hit me like a freight train. I was reading Dale Carnegie, specifically his insights about empathetic listening versus what I call mind reading, and something clicked. Carnegie talked about truly hearing people versus assuming we know what they mean before they finish speaking. But I realized there's an even deeper layer to this problem. The most perceptive people, the ones who pride themselves on reading between the lines, picking up on subtle cues, understanding what others really mean, these are often the ones who fall into the most dangerous traps. Why? Because when you're good at something, you start to trust it completely. When you can occasionally read someone perfectly, you begin to believe you can always read everyone perfectly. Think about it. The person who never tries to read people might miss some opportunities for deeper connection, but they're also less likely to create conflict based on false assumptions. Meanwhile, the highly perceptive person is constantly making judgments, drawing conclusions, and acting on information that might be completely fabricated by their own mind. Carnegie emphasized meeting people where they are, truly listening without agenda. But what happens when your brain is so good at pattern recognition that it starts seeing patterns that don't exist? What happens when your emotional intelligence becomes emotional assumption? This brings us to the three major traps that highly perceptive people fall into. I call these the trinity of misperception, and once you see them, you'll recognize them everywhere in your own life. The first trap is social pareidolia. You know pareidolia, right? It's when you see faces in clouds or hear voices in static. Your brain is so good at finding patterns that it creates them even when they're not there. Social pareidolia is the same thing, but with human behavior. You walk into a room and someone doesn't make eye contact immediately. Your brain, trained to read social cues, instantly creates a story. They're angry with you. They're avoiding you. They're being disrespectful. But maybe they're just focused on their phone, dealing with a family emergency, or simply didn't notice you enter. Your pattern-seeking brain has created a social narrative from incomplete data. I see this constantly in workplaces. Someone sends a short email response, and suddenly there's a whole story about how they're upset, being passive-aggressive, or losing interest in the project. The reality, they might have been typing on their phone while walking between meetings. They might be dealing with a dozen urgent issues. They might simply prefer concise communication. The second trap is projection. This one's insidious because it feels like deep insight. You see someone behaving in a certain way, and you think you understand their motivations because you recognize the behavior. You've felt that way before, so obviously they must be feeling the same way now. Here's the problem. People can exhibit identical behaviors for completely different reasons. Someone might be quiet in a meeting because they're angry, or because they're thinking deeply, or because they're feeling insecure, or because they're bored, or because they have nothing to add. Your brain takes their quietness and matches it to your own experience of being quiet, then assumes identical motivation. I once worked with someone who I was convinced disliked me. Every interaction felt tense. Every response seemed curt. Every meeting felt like they were barely tolerating my presence. I built an entire narrative about professional jealousy, personality conflicts, and workplace politics. Months later, I discovered they were dealing with a serious family illness and were simply emotionally overwhelmed. Their behavior had nothing to do with me whatsoever. I had projected my own experiences of workplace tension onto a completely unrelated situation. The third trap is overinterpretation of microsignals. This is where your perceptive abilities become hyperactive. You start reading enormous meaning into tiny cues. A slightly raised eyebrow becomes skepticism. A pause before responding becomes deception. A change in posture becomes defensiveness. The human face has over 40 muscles. People's expressions are constantly shifting based on comfort, lighting, physical sensations, random thoughts, memories. When you're trained to read faces, you can start treating every micro-expression as a deliberate communication. You become like someone with supersensitive hearing who can't filter out background noise. Every tiny signal becomes meaningful, even when it's just noise. I knew someone who became convinced their romantic partner was losing interest because of changes in their texting patterns. Response times increased by minutes, emoji usage decreased, message length got shorter. They built a case for relationship decline based on digital microsignals. The reality: their partner had started a new job with stricter phone policies and less downtime. The changes in communication had nothing to do with feelings and everything to do with circumstances. So how do we harness the power of perception without falling into these traps? I've developed what I call the triple filter system. It's simple, but requires discipline. First filter is repeated evidence. You need to see the same signal at least 3 times in different contexts before you give it significant weight. One instance of unusual behavior is data, not conclusion. 2 instances create a pattern worth noting. 3 instances across different situations might actually mean something. This filter alone would have saved me from countless misunderstandings. That colleague I thought disliked me. If I had waited for repeated evidence across multiple contexts, I would have realized their behavior was consistent regardless of who they were interacting with, which should have pointed me toward external factors rather than personal conflict. The second filter is context consideration. Before you interpret any behavior, force yourself to consider at least 3 alternative explanations that have nothing to do with your initial assumption. This breaks the automatic pattern matching that leads to social pareidolia and projection. Someone seems distracted during your presentation. Instead of assuming they're bored or disrespectful, consider alternative contexts. Are they dealing with urgent messages? Are they processing complex information? Are they naturally fidgety? Do they have a medical condition affecting attention? Are they actually very engaged, but expressing it differently than you expect? The third filter is explicit confirmation. This is the hardest but most powerful filter. Instead of acting on your interpretation, you find a way to check it directly. This doesn't mean confronting people aggressively or making awkward accusations. It means creating safe opportunities for clarification. If someone seems upset with you, instead of responding to your assumption of their emotional state, you might say something like, "I want to make sure I'm understanding your perspective correctly. Could you help me see what I might be missing?" This opens space for them to correct your interpretation without making them responsible for managing your assumptions. Now let's talk about implementing a conversation protocol that prevents most perceptive traps before they start. This is a systematic approach to human interaction that honors your perceptive abilities while keeping them in check. The protocol starts with 2 open-ended questions. Instead of leading with your interpretation of what you're seeing, lead with genuine curiosity. Instead of, "You seem upset about the project," try, "How are you feeling about the direction we're taking?" Instead of, "I can tell this topic bothers you," try, "What's your experience been with this kind of situation?" Open-ended questions do 2 things. They give people space to share what's actually true for them, rather than responding to your assumptions, and they provide you with data that's directly from the source, rather than filtered through your interpretive patterns. The second part of the protocol is what I call one reversible action. Before you make any significant decision based on your reading of someone else, take one small, easily reversible step to test your interpretation. If you think someone is losing interest in a project, instead of having a serious conversation about their commitment, you might adjust your communication style slightly and see how they respond. If you think someone feels overwhelmed, instead of taking work away from them, you might offer additional resources and gauge their reaction. Reversible actions let you test hypotheses without creating major consequences if you're wrong. They're like social experiments that gather more data without risking relationship damage. The final part of the protocol is short feedback loops. Don't let your interpretations brew for weeks or months. Create regular opportunities for quick check-ins and course corrections. This might be as simple as ending conversations with, "Did I understand that correctly?" Or, "Is there anything I missed?" Short feedback loops prevent small misunderstandings from becoming major relationship issues. They also train you to seek confirmation rather than trusting your interpretations automatically. Let's walk through some practical cases where this protocol makes all the difference. First case, ambiguous text messages. You receive a response that seems curt or dismissive. Instead of assuming tone and emotional state, you apply the triple filter. Is this part of a repeated pattern of communication change? What alternative explanations exist for their communication style right now? How can you check your interpretation without creating conflict? Maybe you respond with an open-ended question that gives them space to clarify their actual state. "How's your day going?" Or, "Anything I can help with?" These responses don't assume anything about their previous message, but create opportunity for them to share what's actually true. Second case, silence in conversations. Someone becomes quiet during a discussion, and your brain immediately creates a story about their emotional state or level of engagement. Instead of responding to your story, you use the conversation protocol. "I'm curious about your thoughts on this," gives them space to share what silence actually means for them. Sometimes silence means deep thinking. Sometimes it means disagreement they're not sure how to express. Sometimes it means they're waiting for others to speak first. Sometimes it means they're dealing with something completely unrelated. Your interpretation might be right, but it might also be completely wrong. Third case, reading faces in meetings. Someone has what you interpret as a closed or skeptical expression during your presentation. Instead of adjusting your entire approach based on this interpretation, you apply the filters. Is this their consistent facial expression or something new? What other factors might influence their appearance right now? How can you check your reading without making them self-conscious? Maybe during a break, you approach with genuine curiosity. "I want to make sure I'm covering this in a way that's useful for you. How is this landing?" This gives them opportunity to clarify their actual experience, rather than forcing them to respond to your interpretation of their facial expression. Here's your 7-day training protocol to rewire these patterns. For 1 week, keep a daily diary of your social hypotheses and verification attempts. Every day, write down 3 instances where you interpreted someone's behavior, emotion, or intention. For each instance, record your initial interpretation, what alternative explanations you considered, and what happened when you checked your assumption. Day 1 through 3, focus just on noticing how often you make interpretative leaps. You'll probably be shocked by how automatic this process is. Day 4 through 5, start applying the alternative explanation filter. For every interpretation, force yourself to consider at least 2 other possibilities. Days 6 and 7, practice explicit confirmation. Find low-risk ways to check your interpretations directly. This training will rewire your brain's relationship with social information. Instead of treating your interpretations as facts, you'll start treating them as hypotheses worth investigating. Instead of acting on assumptions, you'll act on verified information. The goal isn't to become less perceptive. The goal is to become more accurate. Your ability to read social cues is valuable, but it becomes exponentially more valuable when it's coupled with verification systems that separate insight from projection. Think about the implications. How many relationships have been damaged by assumptions? How many opportunities have been missed because you thought you knew what someone was thinking? How much mental energy have you spent responding to stories that existed only in your head? The most profound shift happens when you realize that true perception isn't about seeing more. It's about seeing accurately. It's not about reading every micro-expression. It's about understanding what expressions actually mean. It's not about having insights about everyone. It's about having correct insights about the people who matter. When you master this balance, something beautiful happens. Your relationships deepen because people feel truly seen rather than categorized. Your decision-making improves because it's based on accurate information rather than compelling stories. Your mental energy increases because you're not constantly managing complex narratives about everyone around you. The people who love you will appreciate being met where they actually are, rather than where your perceptive abilities think they are. The people you work with will trust you more because they don't feel constantly analyzed and interpreted. You'll trust yourself more because your insights will be grounded in reality rather than projection. This isn't about becoming naive or losing your perceptive edge. This is about sharpening that edge so it cuts cleanly rather than creating ragged wounds. This is about honoring both your intuitive gifts and the complex reality of other people's inner lives. So here's what I want you to do right now. In the comments below, share one area where you tend to see too much or make too many assumptions. Be honest about your perceptive traps. Also, suggest topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. And if this resonated with you, share it with someone who might benefit from thinking about these ideas. Next week, we're going deeper into the psychology of human connection with something that might surprise you: to love and be loved. The hidden mechanics that make or break every relationship you'll ever have. It's going to challenge some fundamental assumptions about what creates lasting bonds between people. Until then, practice seeing clearly rather than seeing everything. Your relationships will thank you, and so will your peace of mind.